In this video, I'm going to show you how to install AT robots using DOSBox on an OS X system. I have OS X High Sierra here to work with, so let's get this started. So to begin with, we need to acquire the AT robots bundle. So I'm here on our web page. I'll just click this to download it. And I'm going to go ahead and just open it with the archive utility as it's suggesting. So it's downloaded it to my downloads folder by default and then unpackaged it into this DOSBox folder here. Just to keep things easier for me when I'm typing stuff later, I'm actually going to drag this DOSBox folder into my user's home directory. So my user here that I'm using for this demo is called AT Robots. So I'll drop that there, and then I'll get the DOSBox folder right alongside my documents and desktop and such. Now, once I've got that in place, I can look inside of it. And here is a subfolder called AT Robots. It's that folder. Let me switch views. It's the AT Robots subfolder that has, excuse me, all of the source code for the AT Robots program, but also all of the AT2 files, the files that represent the individual robot programs. So there's indirect, there's also ATL files. These are encrypted AT robot programs like Mosquito here, but a bunch of others that aren't, like Pea Shooter and so on. So we need a way to get to that directory. Oops, let me get back to here and see if I can remember how to get over, how to navigate this in a Mac, since I barely use one anymore. So right from my user's home directory is a subdirectory called DOSBox, within which is the AT Robots folder. When we install DOSBox, this is just a folder we'll use in DOSBox, but it's not Mac DOSBox. It's got Windows version of DOSBox embedded in it. But what we'll do is get DOSBox right from their website, and then when we launch DOS, we want it to mount this AT robots directory as if it was the root of the hard drive for that DOS system, so that everything else will work fine. And I'll show you how to do that right now. So now what we do is we can go to DOSBox.com, click on downloads, and it'll take you to this page, and click right here on the Mac OS X disk image universal download. That's going to give us this file here I've downloaded ahead of time. Once you have it, just double click on it. It'll open it up in your file explorer, and then what we need to do is put this package, the application package for DOSBox, in your applications folder. So I'm going to open up a second Finder window right here, and I'll just drag DOSBox over here into applications. And there it is. So at this point I don't need that disk image mounted, so I'll unmount it. That'll get rid of that window behind the scenes. And what I'm going to do is just launch DOSBox for the first time. It'll ask if I want to open it since it's not an official thing through the Apple Store. There it is behind the scenes. Now, if you run the default DOSBox on Mac like this, it's going to load us up into this Z RAM disk prompt. We don't care for this, or at least I don't care for this. I'm just going to type exit to terminate DOSBox. But running it the first time created for my user, the AT Robots user, a default DOSBox preferences file. In the Windows and Linux world, there's a DOSBox configuration file called DOSBox.conf. We don't have that in the Mac world. Instead, we have a weird preferences file under our secret library folder in our users directory. So now that that default file has been created by launching DOSBox, I can edit it to make it do what I want in terms of running AT robots. So I'm just going to launch my terminal here, and then I'll edit that file. I'm going to use Vim from the command line, but you're welcome to use any text editor you like to access this. But the file I'm looking for is right off the root directory in the library folder, and then in a subdirectory called preferences. Both library and preferences have capital letters to begin them, so you got to remember that. And in the preference directory is all caps DOSBox. So if you just do all caps DOS and hit tab, you're going to get this preference file. So let's edit it so that it's suitable for our needs. Most of this we are going to just leave alone, but I'm going to roll down, where are we, to this section here, the rendering section. So in the render section is a line that says scalar equals normal 2x by default. I want to make sure that that is a forced situation, because I have at least found on a number of different Mac systems that it doesn't do the scaling, and so you end up, at least with the ATRobots GUI, being this super tiny 320 by 240 pixel interface. I just want to fix that here. So to do that, I'm going to add a space and then the word forced to that line, and that's going to ensure that it uses a 2 times pixel scaler no matter what. Now, if you have a super high res screen, you know, like a 4K screen or something, you may actually need to change this so that it uses a 3x scaler instead of a 2x scaler. But you should only do that if the 2x still makes it so small that it's not really usable, because 3x may extend beyond the size of your screen if you don't have as many pixels as you think. But for a lot of high-res Retina displays today, 3x is okay. Once I've done that, I also am going to go down, oops, I think it's actually above. Come to think of it. Yes, it was. So one of the first sections, which has this heading, SDL, has a bunch of different things here, but one of the items is auto lock. And so what happens is when your mouse enters DOSBox, there are games, you know, where you're moving the mouse around to look all over the place, like a lot of first-person shooters use. And if you move your mouse to the right and the mouse were to go outside of the DOSBox window, that would cause you problems in gameplay. So by default, DOSBox is set up to lock your mouse, and so that's a problem for ATRobots because it doesn't really use the mouse much except for the front GUI for selecting robots. So when you're trying to use your mouse to go do something because you know, somebody sends you a message or email or whatever it might be, your mouse will be stuck until you release it. And I think you can press, yeah, it's actually right here in the comments. You can press Control F10 to unlock the mouse, but you got to remember to do it, and you got to remember that keystroke. So what I like to do is just to turn off the auto lock, because at least for what our purposes are, we don't need it. So I'm going to change auto lock from true to false. All right, only one other big section of things to do, and that's all the way at the bottom of the file. So I page down until I get to the bottom of the file, and there's a section called AutoExec. The old DOS days, I don't know if Windows still has one or not, but in the DOS days, there was a file in the root of your C drive called autoexec.bat. And once the operating system booted, if you had some stuff you wanted to run every time it booted, that would be found in this sort of shell script file, the batch file called autoexec. This is what our DOSBox is going to run with its cloned DOS operating system. It'll just run these commands for the same purpose. So instead of that RAM drive, the Z drive, we want a C drive that has ATRobots in it. So the first thing we're going to do is mount as the C drive our ATRobots directory, which I installed, at least in this video, right in my home users directory. So there was the home user directory, and then DOSBox, and then ATRobots under that. So tilde means your user's home directory, slash DOSBox with a capital DOSB, and then came ATRobots, the directory. So that directory will now be the root of a C drive. Then I'm going to change from the Z drive to the C drive with this command, and then I'll launch the AT-robes executable, which is the little GUI that we can pick robots from. And once that executable is finished running, instead of coming back to the DOS prompt, I'm just going to have it exit for me by saying exit here. So now I'm going to write the changes to that file, get rid of that text editor, and this time when I go to run this thing, I ought to actually get it to open up. Hello? Okay, there we go, double clicking. There, now it's launched right away for me. I can can launch this thing right away. Get the game to run. This is running a little bit slow, but it has to do with the fact that I'm running all this through a virtual system on my Linux host. So I'm running simulations of an operating system within which I'm running simulations of an operating system within which I'm running a simulation of a bunch of robots. So it's bound to be slow the way I'm doing it for this video. But if you're running Mac natively, this is going to work just fine. So one last note, since Mac is a Unix-based operating system, you should know that it has different line endings than the DOS operating system has. So DOS uses a 2-character line ending, a carriage return followed by a line feed, and in the Unix and Linux world there's just a single character. So when you start a brand new text file in your Mac to create a new robot, you save it inside the AT-robots directory and try to launch it with the AT-robots GUI. What will likely happen is that robot will just show up and sit there and do nothing. That's your first clue that the problem is the line endings of your file. The reason it's a problem is because most source files start with comments at the top for identifying the name of the program, who wrote it, what it does, all that kind of stuff. Well, when DOS sees your file, it'll see the first line just fine. But when it gets to the end of it, it'll see a single character end of line instead of a 2-character end of line. And so it won't think there's actually a new line. It'll continue to read the rest of the bytes of the file, line by line by line, as if they were all part of the same line, which, because of your comment at the top of the file, happens to be one super long file-sized line comment, meaning your program basically is an empty file or just one comment. And so it doesn't do anything, it just sits there. So remember, if you create new files from scratch on your Mac and you see a runtime performance of a robot that just sits still, the first thing you might do is open that thing back up in your text editor and figure out how to make your text editor save the file again, but with DOS or Windows style line endings. That's the carriage return line feed sequence. Another way to avoid that problem is to, whenever you want a new robot to be created, just open an existing robot from the AT-robots folder, save it under the new name that you like, delete the contents, and start typing anew, because every text editor will keep the line endings of the files that it opened. And that should be plenty to get you up and running here on your Mac with AT-robots in DOSBox.